Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. An energy framework has been signed by Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, pledging a new oil pipeline from Alberta to BC. Much fanfare at the announcement this morning in Calgary. Much pushback here in BC. Premier David Eby will speak at 12:30, and we will bring that to you live. My guests for the hour, SFU Environmental Resources Professor Tom Gunton and ResourceWorks CEO Stewart Muir. We're taking your calls too. Is this agreement in BC's interest? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Again, we're asking you, is this energy agreement in BC's interest? Is it in the national interest? You can call us now. Our number is 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950, or hit pound 690. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. Lots of eyes were on Calgary this morning.
This is a really great day for Albertans. We have been working for some time on addressing the 9 bad laws, as I like to call them, that have been impacting our investment climate here, and I'm pleased that we've reached an agreement.
We have more work to do going forward, but a multifaceted agreement. In effect, it creates an energy transition, all aspects of energy, but really sets the stage for an industrial transformation.
Here are some details of the deal. It declares that an Alberta bitumen pipeline to Asian markets is a priority. It suspends the oil and gas emissions cap. It commits to adjusting, that's the word in the MOU, the oil tanker ban on BC's coast if necessary. And the two sides are committing to increasing the industrial carbon price in Alberta. It also says Canada and Alberta will engage BC in tripartite discussions regarding a potential project and would engage, quote, meaningfully with Indigenous peoples in both provinces. It also stresses the pipeline will be privately constructed and financed with the intention of obtaining Indigenous co-ownership. Well, for a view from Alberta, we've reached CBC business reporter Paula Duhatschek in Calgary. Hi, Paula.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What's the mood like right now in the oil patch?
Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney just wrapped up speaking at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, and there were a packed room, 1,000+ people there that gave him a standing ovation. And I think that right there is pretty telling. As you can probably imagine, a year ago, a standing ovation from a Calgary business crowd for a Liberal Prime Minister, probably not something that would have happened. I also spoke just before this with the CEO of an oil and gas company here in town. He said he's feeling very proud, very excited about this news and what this means for the Canadian oil patch. However, that being said, if you were thinking that downtown Calgary was all parties and parades this morning, I think it's not quite like that. There's still a lot of caution here. Companies and people do realize that this is kind of the first step in a longer process, and there's still quite a bit that needs to happen before a new pipeline might actually break ground.
Right, and no private sector proponent right now. Why is that?
Well, the argument from the Premier of Alberta and from some in the industry is that until this point, Canada has just had too many environmental laws and that these laws have been too complicated. And so companies have had a hard time making sense of what their obligations actually are, what their future obligations might be, and that's made them really reluctant to actually spend money on new projects. Now, in theory, this MOU should clear some of that up and pave the way for a private sector proponent to move forward. However, that being said, I will say that taking on this type of project is also a really, really big commitment. It's going to take a lot of money, a lot of years to build, and companies are probably also thinking about what happened with the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Of course, yes, as you know, the cost overruns were pretty significant, cost way more than was expected, and it's possible that companies in today's day and age might even be looking for the government to backstop any cost overruns that are outside their control before they would put their hand up and agree to put their name on this type of thing. And then one other thing I'll just say quickly, and I really don't need to tell you this, just because there's support coming from the federal government, that absolutely does not mean that this support is universal. This type of project could very well face court challenges, protests from Indigenous groups, environmental groups, and all those factors could also be making these pipeline companies maybe just feeling a little bit more cautious about putting their hand up.
Paula, thank you very much for your reporting on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
CBC Calgary business reporter Paula Duhatschek. And when it comes to that opposition, I'll note that the chief of the Health Technician, Marilyn Slett, is speaking in a few moments as well. We'll keep an eye on that for you. Her reaction to this MOU being announced today, being signed today. She has spoken in opposition in recent days as well. Now to BC's North Coast now, and CBC reporter Yasmine joins us from Prince Rupert for reaction. Hi, Yasmine.
Hello.
So what is the reaction that you're seeing? You're in Prince Rupert, an important city to hear from, because although there's no route specified, Premier Danielle Smith has mentioned Prince Rupert several times in speaking to her ambitions for a pipeline. So given where you are, who have you talked to and what's the reaction?
Yeah, that's right, Michelle. And because Danielle Smith has said this, that Prince Rupert would make sense as an endpoint because of its proximity to the Pacific and to Asian markets. But there has been a lot of reaction pouring in today from BC, and a lot of it is against a pipeline and against any changes to the federal tanker ban. I spoke with Arnie Nagy. He is a climate activist based in Prince Rupert, but is a member of the Haida Nation. And he is strongly opposed to a pipeline because of concerns that it could lead to an oil spill. He says that he has been fighting against pipelines for decades and says he will continue to do that. Here's more from him.
We have a right to protect what is ours. We haven't surrendered anything to the Crown. This is our traditional territories, belong to the First Nations. We decide what's best for First Nations in our territories, not somebody from Alberta or somebody from Saskatchewan deciding that they want to line their pockets for political expediency and try and get reelected off the backs of our way of life that we've carried since time immemorial.
I also spoke with the mayor of Prince Rupert, who said he has questions about what kinds of economic opportunities a potential pipeline could bring to his community. And he says this will certainly be a hotly contested issue among his residents. Here's more from him.
It would undoubtedly be a very significant debate within the community. We're an industrial community. And yet we are also a seafaring community, and we've earned our living on the sea and the water around us. So I'm sure it would be a lively discussion in the community. I'm not sure where it would land, quite frankly.
That is Prince Rupert Mayor Herb Pond speaking to CBC's Yasmine Franea. Yasmine, thank you very much for your time. That is CBC reporter Yasmine Franea in Prince Rupert. Let's take a couple of calls now before we go to our panel, asking you, is this energy agreement in BC's interest? Is it in the national interest? Give us a call, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. And we have a caller from Prince Rupert at Dodge Cove, and Des is on the line by Prince Rupert. Hi there, Des.
Good afternoon.
Yes, and what do you think of this agreement? Is it in BC and the national interest?
I believe it is in neither interest, to be perfectly honest. I think this is a rather foolish ploy politically, and in the end, it will, in all likelihood, fail. That being said, the people in this region have stood shoulder to shoulder for the last 5 decades in opposition to oil and tankers, culminating in the tanker ban brought in several years ago. And I can assure you that the people of this region will continue to stand with that position in opposition, and this will not be taken lightly.
Des, thank you very much for the call. And Jerry is next at Hornby Island. And what do you think of this energy agreement between Ottawa and Alberta? Is it in BC's interest, Jerry?
Between Ottawa and Alberta, is it?
I'll get you to turn down your radio, Jerry. Are you there? We've lost our connection with Jerry. Let's go to Carol at Chetwynd now. Your thoughts on this agreement? Hi, Carol.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure can. Go ahead.
Hello, Michelle. How are you?
I am doing fine. Thanks very much for calling. What do you think of this deal?
I think it's a good deal for the federal government and the provincial government for both ways. And the reason I think that is they're laying off people in the sawmill left and right. And so if somebody could go work on those pipelines, that'd be good. Not everybody in BC is a teacher who could, but people could go work with their hands as a mechanic or welders. And so I think it's good for BC, good for Alberta, and good for the steel company down in Ontario. So they're going to produce more pipeline, and those pipelines are built out of steel. So it's good for the country.
Carol, thank you very much for calling in from Chetwynd. And let's go now to our panel. We're taking your calls on this. Is this energy agreement in BC's interest? Is it in the national interest? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Taking your emails, bctoday@cbc.ca, and watching your comments on our TikTok Live as well. And again, Premier David Eby is set to speak to reporters on this with his reaction in about 15 minutes from now. We'll bring that to you live when it begins. Tom Gunton is Professor of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University. Stewart Muir is President and CEO of Resource Works that focuses on opportunities for the natural resource industry. Good afternoon to you both. Good to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Michelle, and hi, Stewart.
Hey, Tom.
I think, Stewart, I'm not sure if our connection, I couldn't hear you very well there, but we'll try and...
Yes, Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me now.
We sure can. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll start with you, Tom. In this agreement, it does pave the way for a pipeline, but also sets conditions for Alberta to meet, including a commitment to a new industrial carbon pricing agreement, increasing it to a minimum of $130 a ton, a commitment on carbon capture and storage, a reduction in methane. So given the economic challenges due to the trade war, an agreement like this, does it bring a kind of compromise, encouraging development, but also addressing environmental concerns?
Well, some of the elements of the agreement are useful, and some of the ones you just summarized. But I think there are two major problems with this. One is the process, that this was an agreement that has significant impacts on British Columbia. And as everyone knows, British Columbia was not part of the discussions going into this memorandum. So you can't agree to a pipeline without involving BC and then come along and say we're going to consult later. So this is a bit of a diplomatic error on the part of the federal government and not involving coastal First Nations in the discussions. Same thing, diplomatic error, which just creates a mistrust and animosity that jeopardizes other projects. So this is not the process way, not the way to go about it. There should have been consultations beforehand. The second big problem with this is that it's not an economically viable project. And the reason for that is because world oil demand is starting to level off. There's currently a huge surplus of oil on the market. China is, in fact, switching to electric vehicles at extremely fast rate. So that market is going to decline in China. So the demand is weakening. And at the same time, you have other pipelines that are capable of expanding and meeting Alberta's needs at much lower cost than building a new $40 billion pipeline. So it's really in everybody's interest to focus on using those other lower cost and lower risk options as opposed to trying to build a new pipeline. So I think that's the big problem. And of course, the other problem, some of your callers mentioned, were the environmental issues associated with tanker spills in this region. Enbridge estimated tanker spill risk to be about 20% to 45%. Other estimates are even higher. So there's a significant risk of a tanker spill, even with the best safety you can have in place. So for all of these reasons, this is not really the direction to go. We should focus on the lower cost, lower risk, other options to meet Alberta's legitimate needs to get their product to market.
Stewart, speaking of the economic viability, right now there is no private proponent, and there's the staunch opposition from the BC government as well as coastal First Nations. What's the actual likelihood that a real project proposal will come forward?
I think the market demand for this pipeline is not a year or two from now. It's what the current projections and investments that have been made and planned over decades in the Canadian oil sands mean. 2035 is when we'll see that period when we need the capacity. That's what the planners, investors have been forecasting. And that's when this project, suppose it follows the timelines that have been suggested in the MOU today, would more likely come online, because it takes years to build these. So it's not about what is the demand forecast for a year or two from now. And we are seeing markets like China that are increasing the type of manufacturing drawn from hydrocarbon resources. They have been the most enthusiastic buyer of newly available oil from Trans Mountain. And that's because it is of a desirable nature for the things they want to do. And it's beyond combustion. And I completely agree with the concerns that Tom is airing on the emissions side. And the technologies that are part of this MOU, like the Pathways Alliance, needing to have a framework in place by April for a large scale or mega scale carbon capture technology to be applied in the oil sands, that's a part of it. I do think, though, that Prime Minister Carney is doing something surely his party, his advisors say is risky. Why is he doing something risky? He is probably doing it because there's something high value to be gained from it at a time when our traditional trade relationship with the United States is frankly in tatters, where we have the manufacturing base of Ontario in areas like automotive especially, that could just simply melt away. What will that mean for incomes, for prosperity, for hospitals, for roads, schools in Canada? Well, when you lose that big a chunk of your industry and we have uncertainty like this, what are you going to do about it? And we've already heard the Prime Minister say earlier this fall that doubling exports to non-US destinations is his agenda. So if you're not going to follow that up with something concrete, how credible can you be? So I think that is probably a part of the thinking here.
My guest, Stewart Muir, President and CEO of ResourceWorks. Tom Gunton is Professor of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University. We're taking your calls, asking you if this energy agreement signed by Ottawa and Alberta today is in BC's interest. 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. As I mentioned, the president of the Coastal First Nations, Marilyn Slett, was speaking just a few moments ago, and here's some of what she had to say. She said, today's MOU does nothing to improve chances of a North Coast pipeline becoming a reality. Coastal nations will do everything in their power to protect it from an oil spill. We will never allow oil tankers because oil spills could destroy our way of life. That from Health Sec Chief Marilyn Slett just a few moments ago. And again, we'll take you live to Premier David Eby in just about 10 minutes from now. Right now, let's go to Ira calling us from Hazelton. What do you think? Is this deal in BC's interest, Ira?
Well, thank you for taking my call. National interest and BC interest, yes, absolutely. But yes, looking at it through a fishbowl, I guess, so to speak. And me being Indigenous, and I'm from the Hazelton area, the Gitxsan Nation, and I am just looking at it from the fishbowl. There's definitely interest, yes. I could see it because the financial interest would be in the best interest of Canada, such as the province as well. Absolutely. But like your other previous Indigenous speakers said, it's part of the territories, and the Indigenous people will do whatever they must do to protect their territories due to the fact that a pipeline will be going through. And I do believe, yes, there should be consultation, yes, which we were left out of, I guess, we meaning the Indigenous people and the Premier. And the Premier, he's definitely making a fuss about it, absolutely. And I am interested to see what he's going to say, because we should and definitely be sitting at the table. With that said, there's going to be so many people that are going to be against this, so many people that are going to be with it. Yes, I absolutely agree. And yes, we need this, but where is it going to go? It's going to go through individuals and house territories.
Yeah.
It's gonna have some definite backlash, and province and Canada better be prepared for it.
Ira, good to hear from you. And you mentioned the Premier. He will be speaking in at 12:30, just a few moments from now. Ellie up next in Vancouver. Is this deal in BC's interest, Ellie?
Oh, I really don't believe so. I think Alberta's just trying to start a cynical fight. Like Danielle Smith has canceled so many renewable projects I'm a millennial, and I just feel like my generation and then Gen Z, Gen Alpha, we're being sold out. The house is on fire, and it feels like politicians are just ripping the copper walls or the copper piping out of the walls. I'm just so livid about this, and I just want all BC residents opposed, call your representatives. We cannot let a pipeline go through the Great Bear Rainforest. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Ellie in Vancouver. Cash next in Kamloops now. Hi, Cash.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure. What do you think? Is
yeah,
go ahead.
This is not in BC's interest whatsoever. This proposed pipeline would go straight through Indigenous territory, it's not Danielle Smith's territory, it's Indigenous territory, so she needs to stay out of that. Repealing the tanker ban is a terrible idea. A disaster would just be unimaginable how devastating that would be. So because it's an Indigenous territory, we know it's not going to pass the courts. It's very likely that a court challenge would block this pipeline deal. And the last thing I want to say is I voted for Mount Carney, strategically voted, because the last thing I think we need is Pierre Poilievre in this country. So I voted for Mount Carney. But if he is going to push this narrative, then he's likely going to lose the support of people like myself in BC if this is what he's going to do. We already know that there's pushback from Liberal MPs in BC against this within his caucus, so he needs to be very careful, I think, with this.
Cash, thank you for the call from Kamloops. You're with BC Today, taking your calls on this energy MOU signed by the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Details coming out this morning. And we are going to hear from the Premier in a few moments from now. My guest as well for the hour, Stewart Muir from ResourceWorks, Tom Gunton, SFU professor. I will keep taking your calls as we listen to the Premier in a few moments from now. You're with BC Today. It's just about 12:28 now. Want to tell you as well about Friday, December the 5th. That's coming up in just over a week, our special day of programming in support of food banks in BC. And we'll have a 3-hour show from noon to 3. Yes, 3 hours. I'll be joined by Margaret Gallagher, host of North by Northwest. And we'll have some special guests for you, including champion race walker Evan Dunphy, Chef Bruno Feldisen, and baker Joe Manday, both from the Great Canadian Baking Show, as well as Canada's Got Talent contestant, magician Blake Alliong. And live music, too, by Zeta, Mikey Jose, Blue Jay Valley, and Luke Wallace. Our own Justin McElroy will be here. He just may have a tune for you as well. So stay tuned for that. We'll be on stage right outside CBC on Hamilton Street. You can come on down and join us. You can donate anytime as well until the end of December. Just go to cbc.ca/kindbc. Click on Donate Now, and there's a drop-down button with a list of the 111 food banks in this province. You can direct your donation to the food bank of your choice. And within hours of making that donation, you will receive a tax receipt by email. Again, that's cbc.ca/kindbc. Just click on the Donate Now button. That's Friday, December the 5th. .30 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thank you for joining us. It is a big news day today as that MOU, that energy agreement between Alberta and the federal government was signed and announced today. We heard the announcement from Mark Carney and Premier Danielle Smith this morning. We are expecting BC Premier David Eby to speak any moment now. We'll bring that to you live as soon as it begins. We'll continue to be joined by our panel, and we'll continue to take your calls as we listen to what the Premier has to say. Right now it is 12:30, time for your CBC News Update with Liam Britton.
Good afternoon. As we've been hearing on BC Today, BC Premier David Eby is set to respond shortly to this morning's signing of a memorandum of understanding between the federal and Alberta governments, giving the province special exemptions from federal environmental laws and offering political support for a new oil pipeline to the BC coast. It's an idea that Eby has repeatedly rejected, and he will speak soon in Victoria at the legislature. And the Union of BC Indian Chiefs has issued a statement saying it is, quote, loudly objecting to the agreement between Ottawa and Alberta. The UBCIC says the deal was negotiated without involving coastal First Nations and is calling on the federal government to clarify its intentions on the tanker ban. Grand Chief Stewart Phillip calls the agreement, quote, high risk and deeply irresponsible. And Nanaimo Mounties say there were no survivors from a plane crash early this morning. The plane crashed around 3 o'clock in a wooded area. According to Mounties, the craft is in a large debris field. No word on how many people were on board or what type of plane was involved. Police are still on the scene. And those are your CBC News headlines from Vancouver.
Liam, thank you very much. That's Liam Britton in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And as we have been telling you, and you've heard all throughout the day here on CBC, Alberta and the federal government have signed an energy agreement aimed at further developing Alberta's energy sector in the face of U.S. tariffs. And Premier David Eby, who has been outspoken in his opposition to this MOU, is scheduled to speak to this any moment now. And there is a microphone ready. We are waiting for him to step up to the podium. We'll take you to that live as soon as it begins. Some details of this deal now. It does declare that an Alberta bitumen pipeline to Asian markets is a priority. It suspends the oil and gas emissions cap. It commits to, quote, adjusting the oil tanker ban on BC's coast if necessary. The two sides committing to increasing the industrial carbon price in Alberta. It also says Canada and Alberta will engage BC in tripartite discussions regarding any potential project and would engage, quote, meaningfully with Indigenous peoples in both provinces. It also says the pipeline will be privately constructed and financed with the intention of obtaining Indigenous co-ownership. It is 12:33 now. We are watching David Eby step up to the podium. Let's go live to the Premier.
Thanks for joining us. There was a significant announcement this morning from the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta. And I'm happy for the opportunity to join you to respond to that agreement. First of all, I'd like to start with where British Columbia is at right now in terms of our efforts to build the national economy, to create jobs and prosperity for Canadians and for British Columbians. We have huge projects, really exciting projects in our province right now that will employ thousands of people, create billions of dollars in revenue for the federal and provincial governments to help pay for the public services that people need, and that are done in a way that is environmentally responsible and that is done in partnership with First Nations. This approach, which we have been working on for years, is why we are leading the country in major projects in the Federal Major Projects Office. We have 4 times more projects than any other province in Canada. These are private sector projects with billions of dollars of investment in Canada that will increase the buying power of Canadians who are struggling with affordability, that will employ thousands of people from across the country in good paying jobs supporting families. And that will do so reducing our reliance on the United States. These projects involve exports to global markets across the Pacific. We're really proud of that. And the core of this work, the foundation of it, is the support of British Columbians, Canadians, and particularly First Nations to be able to work together to lift the whole country up. With the announcement today from the federal government and from the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta, my anxiety about the pipeline proposal that has come from Alberta, that is a key part of this agreement, is that it runs the very significant risk that has already partially been realized of taking our eye off the prize, of distracting the federal government, distracting resources and pulling time away from real projects that can be delivered in the near term. And just one example, we have the largest private sector investment in Canadian history that will reach final investment decision in the next year, the LNG Canada Phase 2 project. We need the federal government focused on that. We need them focused on the $50 billion in mining projects in the Northwest enabled by the North Coast Transmission Line. These are projects that are imminently getting their permits or already have all relevant approvals. They have private sector backers, and they are ready to go. The reason why I'm anxious about this proposed pipeline project from Alberta being a distraction is that we've already seen that happen. Nutrien, a large potash producer from Saskatchewan, was involved in conversations with the federal government, with the government of Saskatchewan, about where to export their potash from. A project that would result in significant jobs in British Columbia, would secure the people of Saskatchewan's access to global markets if it stayed in Canada, and would also reduce the risk of Donald Trump putting tariffs on Canadian potash going through the United States. They were making a decision about which port to export through. Unfortunately, instead of having conversations with British Columbia about this project, the Premier of Saskatchewan says he was engaged with Premier Smith about this pipeline project proposal. Because of that, in my opinion, Nutrien made the decision to ship out of Washington State instead of out of British Columbia. Premier Moe and I should have been working together on addressing bottlenecks by encouraging the federal government to invest in new rail infrastructure, the Massey Tunnel, bottlenecks to our ports that Nutrien cited as one of the reasons why they decided to go to Washington State. So my concern about this project being a distraction to real projects and real opportunities for Canadians, unfortunately, I've seen that happen once already, and I don't want to see it happen again. The pipeline proposal has no project proponent. There is not one private company that has stepped up to say, if you build it, we'll buy it. If the approvals are in place, we'll build it. Not one. It has no route. Currently, taxpayers, through the Trans Mountain Pipeline Corporation, are funding the development of the route. Not only does it not have permits, it doesn't even have a route. But the third thing it doesn't have is something that the Prime Minister said he believed was core in the House, in the federal Parliament just recently, that First Nations agree and support projects before they will go forward through the Major Projects Office. And this project does not have the support of coastal First Nations. And that's important to us in BC because all of the projects that I outlined to you, those billions of dollars of investment, those thousands of jobs, depend as well on the support of coastal First Nations, whose support we do have for these projects. There are significant additional components to this agreement that British Columbia will need to take some time to study and understand. There is a marked departure in federal government policy around oil and gas cap, emissions cap, around clean electricity regulations and other pieces that we'll have to study to understand. But the bottom line for us is that we need to make sure that this project doesn't become an energy vampire with all of the variables that have yet to be fulfilled. No proponent, no route, no money, no First Nation support, that it cannot draw limited federal resources, limited Indigenous governance resources, limited provincial resources away from the real projects that will employ people, provide the country with money that we desperately need, and provide investment and access to global markets to deepen our trade relationships overseas. So I will continue to advocate for British Columbia's interests, which I believe are also Canadian interests, in delivering as many projects as we can, as quickly as possible, to grow our economy and support people across the country. I'm proud of the fact that BC is the economic engine of the new economy that we're building together as Canadians, and we will continue to play our role. And all I ask is that every project across the country be evaluated against the same criteria. Do you have permits? Do you have a private project proponent? How much money is it going to bring in? How much are you going to raise wages and GDP for Canadians? And on those criteria, BC, far and away, leads the country. We will continue to do so, and we're proud to do so. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today at the Legislature in Victoria. We're going to take questions from the media now. All members of the media will have one question and one follow-up. And today we're going to start with Keith Baldry from Global News.
Hi, Premier. Is today a day of embarrassment for British Columbia, given that two other governments meeting in secret, concocting a scheme to implement something in this province that this government is on record as being vehemently against? And what does that say about BC's place in Confederation?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I'm incredibly proud of what our province is doing for not just British Columbians, but for Canadians in lifting our gross domestic product, in creating revenues that are going to support all Canadians through the public services that they deserve, leading the country in this work. I understand the need for the Prime Minister to engage with premiers, to reach agreements with them, and I don't fault him for engaging with Alberta on this. It would have been good for BC to be at the table. There's no question about it. Had BC been at the table, the agreement wouldn't have omitted basic things like, are we going to do anything about spill response? Or we would have canvassed potential win-win scenarios of asking, if we're going to start from scratch on a new project for the country, why aren't we talking about refining capacity? Why aren't we talking about using Alberta's oil and gas to ensure that Canada is independent of any oil and gas imports, that we only use Canadian oil and gas? In British Columbia, our philosophy is for our resources, we're trying to get as many jobs as possible out of those resources before they go to global markets. We too often sell our resources wholesale and buy them back retail. And that would have been one of the conversations I would have raised at the table. Why is British Columbia importing oil and gas from the United States? Why is Ontario doing that? When we have these resources here, could we increase refining capacity and have a win for everybody here? I think there are wins for everybody, but that can't happen if we're not all at the table together.
And Keith, do you have a follow-up?
Yes. So as you say, there's no proponent, there's no plan, there's no route, really nothing there. Today, the Prime Minister said if there's no proponent, there's no pipeline, period, full stop. Do you interpret that to mean that there's not going to be any federal subsidy, as we saw with the TMX pipeline, and therefore the odds of this pipeline being built are rather remote?
I think this proposal has some major challenges. First of all, we already have a publicly owned pipeline. It is not at capacity. It is for sale. Nobody wants to buy it. For this new pipeline proposal, it similarly has no company that has stepped up and said, even under the most optimistic conditions, that they would be interested in building it, that if it were already built, that they would be interested in buying it, which leaves only one possible way that it could get built, which is through a massive taxpayer-funded support in the order of $30 to $40 billion of taxpayer dollars to get it built. Now, in that scenario, I think British Columbia has some projects that could compete with this one that would create just as much opportunity and be significantly cheaper to taxpayers. But we're not even asking for taxpayer dollars. I don't think one taxpayer dollar should go into this project, and I'm glad to see in the agreement that that is a condition. And I think that that is probably fatal to Premier Smith's proposal. I understand the Prime Minister was speaking to the Calgary Board of Trade and jokingly asked if anyone wanted to be a proponent of the project. Joking aside, there is no proponent. There is unlikely to be a proponent. And so even if there were a proponent, one of the key hurdles of coastal First Nations support has not been achieved. And it has been their position since 1977 that the oil tanker ban needs to be in place, because if there were an oil spill, their way of life would end, as would $1.7 billion in economic activity on the coast.
Thanks, Premier. Next, we'll head
That
to
is
Kate
Premier David Eby speaking to reporters and giving his reaction to the MOU signed this morning by Alberta and Ottawa. opening the door to a pipeline from Alberta to BC. And he said his anxiety about this proposal is that it runs the risk of distracting from other projects, other energy projects. He cited LNG Canada Phase 2, some mining projects as well here in BC, and projects that he said would result in jobs here in British Columbia. So Premier David Eby speaking right now in front of the legislature. We'll bring that back to you in a few moments. But right now, let's go back to our panel and hear some more of your calls on this. My guests are Stewart Muir, President and CEO of Resource Works, and Tom Gunton, SFU Professor of Resource and Environmental Management. Stewart, let me go to you on that. The Premier has said this before and reiterated today that there are these other projects that BC is excited about. He's also talked about the Silesums project, the North Coast Hydro Transmission Line, saying that could be at risk because a pipeline proposal threatens to support the social license from First Nations about with regard to those projects. Are you concerned about other energy development, other resource development at risk or being distracted away from due to this pipeline?
Well, we've heard much of what he said before. I think the new part of this package today, the Ottawa, Alberta MOU, is that affects BC directly, is the nuclear intertie. When you consider that Site C, which was promised and needed for industrial development, the kind of projects the Premier was just speaking of that are so important to the future, but we are already into rationing of electricity, clean electricity, to build those projects. So I think what is in the deal today needs to be looked at in Victoria, because what they're saying is we're going to be able to build nuclear electricity from Alberta to put into the grid that would flow into BC. That seems to be what one would read into this, that would then allow BC to do all the things it's going to do and more. So it feels like that is the bone that they're throwing BC. It maybe is a little early for the province to have analyzed it. But yeah, I think as far as the political messaging that we've just heard, it's not surprising. So it won't be a surprise in Ottawa that the Premier has said these things. And I think these are legitimate concerns that I don't think anyone would want to see something that is close to landing that's very desirable. Everyone wants to in any way become an either or. And I think that would be a losing situation if it happened, but it's too early to say whether that's a likelihood.
Tom, let me go to you on the social license part of it. We do see this opposition from the Premier and from coastal First Nations, but when it comes to the public, I spoke with the mayor of Kitimat yesterday, Phil Germuth, and a decade ago, Kitimat voted to oppose the Northern Gateway project, which was scrapped. But when I spoke to Mayor Germuth yesterday, he wouldn't outright oppose a new pipeline. And he kind of talked about new technology, emerging technology, and he said he'd be willing to look at a new proposal. So has the social license environment, public opinion changed on the potential for a pipeline?
Well, I mean, there's two dimensions of that. One is the social license. You definitely need, and Stewart knows this, so you have to work with all the parties involved to get agreement and support for projects. And that's what the Premier was talking about as being very important, to maintain this social license and support for all the projects that are actually on being developed now and on the boards to be developed in the near future. So there's billions and billions of dollars in projects that can become at risk as a result of diverting attention away to something which is really a non-economic venture that's way in the future, probably never, that is taking that attention away and creating conflict as a result of proceeding without due consultation, already announcing a pipeline without involving people. So that's one dimension of the why you need agreement on this. And I know Stewart knows this very well. You've got to work with everybody involved to get people on side. And unfortunately, by making a unilateral decision, the federal government combined with Alberta, that puts that kind of process at risk and makes these other projects more challenging to bring to the finish line.
Let's go back to some more of your calls as we continue to watch Premier David Eby. We'll take you back there in a few moments. But let's take some more of your calls asking you if this energy agreement between Ottawa and Alberta is in BC's interest. Is it in the national interest? Let's go to Ken now in Peachland. Hi, Ken. Thanks for waiting.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I believe, yes, this is to the benefit of the BC, Alberta, and the whole country. I guess we have to look at how we can unite the whole country for the economy, what we are going through currently with the tariff, all those things, and then leave the political power and fights aside. I mean, see what are the benefits we are taking from this thing. I mean, as far as the consultation with the different group, yes, we know everybody's going to oppose it. So, I mean, we are not going to go anywhere. But at the same time, yes, consultation is good. But, the bottom line is we do benefit from this. So that's one way to export our products. Thank you.
Ken, thank you very much from Peachland. Cody in Penticton. Hi, Cody. What do you think of this deal? Is it in the province's interest?
Oh, I don't think it's in the province's interest, and I don't think it's in the national interest either, because as other people have said about spills and, consultation, you got to remember that when you build this pipeline, you're expanding an unconventional source of energy. And there have been lots of studies. There was one in the Canadian Economics Journal that said that if you remove the oil and gas industry from overall productivity in the Canadian economy, productivity would be on par with the United States. So essentially, the oil and gas sector acts as a drag on the economy because an unconventional source takes tons of water, it takes tons of steel and energy to essentially mine, right? So I don't think that overall it is a good thing for the economy, and I don't understand this sovereignty argument. I'm just reading today about people in the oil patch. They're losing their jobs because of the global price in oil right now, and I think interlocking into that system is just going to lead more to that. It's unstable. We're not insulating ourselves from, global market prices. So you're just trading off uncertainty in the United States into a global market. So I don't think it is an actual positive for even Alberta. I mean, the oil industry has laid off 40,000 people in the last 10 years. So who's the industry working for?
Okay. Cody, thank you very much. We have lots of comments coming in on TikTok as well. Nana writes, it won't be in the best interest of BC or Canada if Alberta takes and sells their oil somewhere else. And Mosey writes, Canada must do this pipeline. And on email, Rebecca writes, says, Canada is not a united country. The premiers do not agree on any proposed projects. The federal government is not strong as they portray the country and to the world. Mr. Carney and Premier Smith should have included Premier David Eby during the signing of this agreement. And no pipeline can reach the Pacific without BC's collaboration. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let's take a couple more calls here in our remaining minutes. And Gail is joining us from Nanaimo. Yes, is this in BC's interest, Gail?
No, it's not in anybody's interest because very few people understand that there's no legislation in place in Canada for a polluter to take the responsibility to pay for the cleanup of wildlife in any kind of spill. I have personal experience with this. I've been involved in 4 oil spills, 3 on the coast of BC, 1 in northern Alberta. And there's legislation where the polluter must pay to clean up the ocean or the water or the land, but nothing for the wildlife. And there's no government body to do that either. It's left to nonprofits, and nonprofits simply don't have the money or the resources. After being through 4 oil spills, I can tell you they're backbreaking, heartbreaking, and bank-breaking.
Gail, thank you for the call. And Harry is our next caller in Richmond. Hi, Harry. What are your thoughts on this deal?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the government is just basically steamrolling over BC to push this pipeline through. And also the fact that isn't the pipeline where it's suggested to be built, isn't it like doesn't that area have extreme weather conditions in the winter time?
On the north coast.
Like, didn't they say, on the north coast where they say they have like 20-meter waves. If you can see the ocean floor during a winter storm, you really want to park a tanker there to load with with oil? Like, that's just an accident waiting to happen.
Okay. Harry, thank you for the call from Richmond. And Warren, finally here in Richmond, our final caller. Hi, Warren. Hi, Warren. Are you there? Okay. Thank you very much for your calls. We are watching Premier Eby. We won't be able to go back to him now, but he did mention that he did talk to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. He said, I spoke to Premier Smith, always happy to sit down with her to explain the position on this proposal and find areas that BC and Alberta could cooperate. But he says he'd always defend BC's position, and its position is to defend the oil tanker ban. This is BC Today here on CBC, and watching your emails as well, of course. Much more coverage on this throughout the day here. Anne writes, yes, the house is on fire, but we must stimulate the economy. Even if it were in BC's interest in the short term, it's not in anyone's interest worldwide ever. Carbon capture is absolute rubbish. Greenwashing. Shame, shame. That is from Anne on BC Today at cbc.ca. Kathy writes us this email, no more corporate welfare. They take the money and run, especially all those foreign-owned companies various governments have subsidized over the years. They leave pollution and sell them clean and close the walls. Where is the oversight there? Thank you for your email, Kathy. Meg writes, when will we talk about the global interest which fossil fuels are simply not in? How many warnings about the planet overheating do we have to read to stop more investments in fossil fuel? This is just greed and not in anybody's interest globally or locally. Thank you very much, June, for your emails. Lots are coming in. bctoday at cbc.ca is our email address. And Tom and Stewart, thank you so much for your time for this discussion on this big news day today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Tom Gunton is Professor of Resource and Environmental Management at SFU. Stewart Muir is President and CEO of ResourceWorks. This is BC Today. Thanks very much for joining us. And of course, yes, much more coverage on this. The MOU, the energy MOU signed between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith earlier today. Lots of reaction coming in, of course, including Premier David Eby. More coverage to come here on CBC.